Hello. This video contains spoilers for Mouthwashing, The Death of a Salesman, and How Fish is Made's DLC, the last one and then another. The Death of a Salesman is a 1949 stage play written by Arthur Miller. It's a uniquely modern tragedy following a character named Willy Loman who, despite having several things we would now consider aspirational, ends up getting himself into a fatal car crash to secure an insurance payout so that he can pay off his debts. The play comments a man is worth more dead than alive, equating one's financial wealth and social standing to their worth as a human being. Unlike traditional Greek tragedies, Willy Loman does not have a defining fatal flaw that seals his fate. Rather, he has numerous flaws which are only exacerbated by a societal structure that incentivizes him engaging in the behavior which leads to his end. Willy is by no means a perfect person, he's pretty awful actually. But it's his obsession with signifiers of status, his desire to be the number one guy, the person with money, woman and respect that galvanizes him to further indulge in his worst vices and ignore his responsibilities. If you've played the game this video is actually about, this should be a familiar character archetype. The play touched a nerve of audiences, confronting them with the raw human message of the inescapable nature of your own shortcomings, be they your own fault or merely a byproduct of the systems you exist within. The play is wreathed in dread, a portrait of the mundane misery of everyday life, so visceral that there is a popular story that after its very first showing, there were men in the audience who simply could not stop crying. So distraught were they at how unbearably real the play was. And then some dude called Eric Bentley wrote a review saying it was woke communist slop. Every story ever told, every work of art ever made exists for a purpose, even if the purpose is just to entertain or capture the eye. Some works, like Death of a Salesman, strive to capture a full portrait of the human experience, to critique individual behaviours and societal systems all at once. This is all well and good, but the scope of such projects can often prove difficult for audiences to navigate, leaving them with the question, what is this even about? Over 70 years after the release of Death of a Salesman, Joanna Kasurin wrote Mouthwashing for Wrong Organ after working on a previous project that was never finished and showed signs of collapsing from the beginning. Speaking with the Washington Post, she said the following about this prior project. It was that state of a team of people trying to convince ourselves we can still fix this if we just try harder, when everything was already limping and on fire. Inspired by this experience, Kasurin set about writing a story that perfectly encapsulates this feeling. Featuring only 6 rooms and a cast of 5 characters, Mouthwashing feels very much like a stage play. Similar to Miller's famous tragedy, there's a question as to if the characters' actions and ultimate fate are entirely their own fault, a result of a failure to take responsibility, or if the characters are simply acting out what they believe to be their assigned roles. A central message pushed is to take responsibility, but to what degree are the characters acting of their own accord, and to what degree are they products of their environment? Mouthwashing is a coalescent tragedy, myriad horrors forming a highly concise collage of misery, which is occasionally offset by bouts of surrealist comedy. Much like Death of a Salesman, it invites highly introspective analysis. It's a mirror, which critiques both the big picture and the individual. Kasurin has stated numerous times that an intention of the game's writing is to make people see themselves in the characters, both their positive and negative traits. She peppers the game with the statement, "I hope this hurts," and this is a message aimed just as much at audiences as it is the characters. To get the maximum value from this story, you need to be able to sympathise with characters who will also completely disgust you. It's supposed to feel personal because it's supposed to hurt you. The game has struck a nerve and fosters such a deeply invested fandom due to how uniquely introspective each playthrough is. Thematically, this is one of the most tightly written games on the market. From developer Q&As, there's evidence that characters and locations were removed from the game due to not fitting a narrative purpose. Quote, "There was going to be one more crew member, another maintenance worker who would have worked alongside Swansea and Daisuke. They were cut very early on though, since they didn't serve enough of a plot function." There are similar answers given about cut locations. Mouthwashing is developed to be as concise as possible in conveying its core narrative and themes. It's designed to make you think, and its highly reflective nature means that no single person will walk away with the same impression. Every single line of dialogue is worth analysing and can be understood in numerous ways, so let's do just that. In comparison to the many and varied video essays on this title, all of which are good by the way, I'm not calling anyone out here, I will not be presenting a singular view of Mouthwashing, but rather suggesting several interpretations as we go through the plot together, before discussing each character in depth. I cannot claim this video will cover literally every aspect of the game, and of course I have my biases, but the intention here is to explore the numerous potential themes at play and provide a holistic look at this titan of narrative. To make this a hopefully easy to follow format, as we go through the plot we'll introduce themes as they arise with a handy little mouthwashing is about blank note. Then when discussing the characters we can talk about how they interface with these themes. If you catch any I didn't, feel free to comment. Mouthwashing is a story driven by characters, so understanding them is crucial to understanding the overarching messages and vice versa. Before that, a brief moment of generic YouTuber housekeeping. Yes, this is a long video. Chapters are available so you can jump forward and backwards as you see fit. Boost the engagement with a joke about the video being just over 10 minutes or on YouTube Shorts if you so desire. This video also contains subjects that some viewers may find disturbing. In response to feedback from my own community, I won't just be putting a general content warning here, I'll also be prefacing the relevant sections with the relevant information so you can dip out whenever you feel you want to. That said, for the sake of helping you gauge if this video is for you, Mouthwashing is at points mildly critical of capitalism, or at least corporate culture. It also has things to say about rape culture and misogyny. In short, if you aren't looking for politicized discussion relating to video games or aren't in the headspace to hear it, then this video, and to be honest this game, aren't for you. This game has a lot to say about contentious topics, and not everyone wants to engage with that, that's fine. There will be spoilers. I'm explaining the entire game, so be wary of that. This is not a substitute for playing the game, and there are very few machines in the world that can't run it, so you should definitely pick up a copy for your smart fridge, but you can probably follow along if you haven't played in a while or didn't follow the story too closely. Finally, I want to give a spotlight to Joanna Kasurinen, who is not only a phenomenal writer, but a fantastic artist. Her work at Wrong Organ, which she co-founded, is some of the most effective storytelling in the medium, so please go and check out more of her and her studio's work. If you liked Mouthwashing but haven't played How Fish is Made, go and play How Fish is Made. You'll like it. I understand this is background noise to most people, but if at any point you find yourself enjoying the video, consider pressing the subscribe button. It's free and it takes 2 seconds. One day you might run out of YouTube to eat to, and pressing the button only offsets that tragic fate. Thanks to the members, and now let's get into it. Immediately upon starting a new game, we're introduced to our setting through text on screen. We learn that the story takes place on a spaceship called the Tulpar. The name, Tulpar, is a reference to the winged horse of Turkic mythology. Likely just a cute reference to the horse theming of the game, however there's a bit of dramatic irony at play here since the Tulpar as a mythological creature is said to move extremely fast and get places in an instant. However, the ship spends most of the game stationary or moving very, very slowly. Fun fact, the Tulpar is also on the national emblem of Kazakhstan.
Whoa, whoa, whoa.
The ship is classified as a freighter, meaning it carries goods from one location to another. The company who owns it is called Pony Express. The ship is about halfway through a roughly year-long journey across the universe. Finally, a bit of text appears which simply reads, "I hope this hurts." This is a recurring motif and the context fluctuates depending on when it appears. However, at this point in the game there is no clearly defined narrator, so this reads more like a message from the game to you, the player. This is a story that's meant to hurt you. This raises our first instance of what mouthwashing is about. Mouthwashing is meant to hurt. It's about hurting and being hurt. Quote from Joanna Kasurinen. "At the risk of sounding pretentious, the medium is the message," she said. "I hope certain people in the gaming industry play this game. I hope they see themselves and I hope it hurts. I hope it hurts, hurts, hurts." Kasurinen calls this opening line the instigating concept of mouthwashing, so keep it in the back of your mind as we go through the story here. Who is supposed to be hurt and who is hurting them? This concept applies both to the characters hurting each other, the devs hurting the characters, and the devs wanting to hurt players to call them out for their worst traits. Following this, mouthwashing opens with a crash. An orbital body has been detected ahead of the vessel, and it falls to you to make a manual correction to the ship's trajectory. The game tells you to make a move to the left, but when interacting with the control panel, your only option is to steer right, directly into the orbital body. 4,000 credits are docked from the crew for failure. Aboard the Tulpar, no mistake goes unpunished, and the punishment is always financial. Autopilot is engaged to correct the ship, and you need to find a key to prevent this from happening. You are trying to crash the ship. It's here that the core gameplay loop of mouthwashing begins. Mouthwashing is reminiscent of classic puzzle games. You wander around, find items, and then utilize said items to solve environmental puzzles. The first one is very simple. You explore the cockpit, find a key, and use it to disengage the autopilot. Mouthwashing is rarely more complex than this, the focus is the narrative, but some of the later puzzles are a bit more perplexing. Whilst exploring areas, future events are foreshadowed. Like a stage play, the sets and props rarely change all that much. Items you need later can be found early, or hinted at through the environment. For instance, this cupboard that contains the key to disengage the autopilot also contains a length of nylon rope that will be relevant later. There's also a hidden code for a gun, but no gun in sight, meaning there is a firearm hidden somewhere on the ship. Next to this code is an employee card for a woman named Anya. You can get achievement for picking it up. I wonder if she knows anything about this missing gun. Mouthwashing jumps back and forth along its timeline, reusing items and sets often. The devs describe the process as getting a load of building blocks of the narrative and then arranging them along a timeline to create an engaging non-linear story, almost like writing story beats on post-it notes. Your character ensures the ship will crash, before running from the cockpit and navigating an impossible maze of corridors littered with Pony Express iconography. Your character is haunted by a model of Polle, the mascot of the company. Polle has some pretty clear-cut symbolism, but it isn't apparent yet, so we'll come back to it later. Finally, the ship crashes and the game flashes forward 2 months. 2 months after the crash and the ship is bathed in marigold twilight. The same can be found on the title screen. The setting sun is symbolic of an impending end, the tragic tone wonderfully established. The developers stated the following in a Q&A regarding the sunset. The sunset imagery was one of the first visuals we associated with Mouthwashing. Joanna pitched the slideshow to the rest of the team with her initial inspos, ideas for the game, etc. The screen being stuck on sunset mode was the way we justified it narratively, but from the beginning orange sunset was one of the core ideas for the visuals of the game we wanted to incorporate. Mouthwashing is a thematic sunset, on Pony Express, on the crew, on everything. This is a good moment to mention our second frame of analysis our second Mouthwashing is about. Mouthwashing is about people surviving on a ship. The stranded and surviving in an isolated environment trope is a common one, and if you want, you can view the story entirely as one of survival and the lengths people will go to try and ensure their own. The desperate situation demands extreme measures be taken by the crew, and some of them are willing to go a lot further than others. You are confirmed to be playing as Jimmy, the new captain of the Tulpa following injury putting prior captain Curly out of commission during the crash. During a discussion we learn of the crew's current situation and their dynamic. 2 months after the crash, the group wants to get into the cargo hold to see if they can find anything to prolong their survival. Only the captain can get into the hold, but Jimmy asserts that he is the captain now and he should be able to get in there. The rest of the crew are introduced here. Anya, the nurse, is a quiet but intelligent woman who suggests the plan which Jimmy immediately puts himself in charge of. Often when she speaks, she's cut off by Jimmy or Swansea mid-sentence, showing that she isn't taken that seriously by the rest of the crew. Daisuke is a young and inexperienced kid, not understanding the nature of the company he works for, being surprised that his bosses aren't chill, and touting a regional junior baseball competition as one of his greatest achievements. Swansea is the most obvious foil to Jimmy, being an experienced and jaded older man who is well aware that any attempts to mess with the cargo will see them losing pay. He comments that the only thing worse than dying slowly is not getting paid. Swansea needs this money to finance his addiction to buying Jordans.
If these shoes aren't drip, I don't know what is.
Despite Swansea's complaints, Jimmy asserts that for better or worse he is the new captain, getting support from the naive Daisuke. You are then given the objective to find a code scanner and get into the hold, before being given free rein to explore the ship. There's some environmental comedy here. Swansea sleeps separate to everyone else because he snores too loud, and there's some fun little critiques of corporate culture on the Polle Says posters. My personal favourite is the one that says rest and not overdoing it is very important, before saying employees will be punished for sleeping more than 5 hours a night. That's how it is sometimes. Whilst exploring, Jimmy can talk with Daisuke. In this interaction we learn the crew have about 4 months of food left but less air. Daisuke is optimistic that the crew will be rescued, commenting that they might even be in articles and TV shows. Jimmy briefly appears cynical but then encourages Daisuke by commenting that they'll be popular with ladies too. Jimmy expresses his dislike of Swansea to Daisuke, but Daisuke is massively impressed by how experienced and competent Swansea is, so he doesn't share in the distaste. Here we see Daisuke being torn by 2 mentors, Jimmy and Swansea, both of whom don't particularly like each other even this early into the crash. This sets up the dynamic for the rest of the story. Daisuke is mentored by 2 men with opposing views and their clashes will lead to his fate. Following this, Jimmy can head into the medical bay, and there, watching him beneath the setting sun, is Curly, badly injured from the crash. Curly has lost both his arms and legs and is covered in bandages.
How am I going to look after them? I've got no legs!
He watches with a single pronounced eye, always locked in on Jimmy, whilst he shudders with pain, fear, or perhaps anger. It's important to note Curly's role here. He's a passive onlooker purely by nature of his condition. Anya is here too, unable to give Curly his painkillers due to the noise he makes. Jimmy is cruel to Anya, contrasting his optimism with Daisuke. He says that Pony Express knows how to cut corners, implying that she's not up to the job. Anya suggests heading to the cockpit to find the code scanner, something which is required to progress, but Jimmy tries to shoot her down, saying that it's entirely foamed up, before eventually agreeing to take a look. Anya sings that Jimmy is so capable, encouraging him, showing him a care that he does not show for her. During this discussion, Anya tries to refer to Curly by his title of captain, but Jimmy corrects her, robs Curly of his title, whilst all he can do is look on. Later, when talking down to her about her poor nursing skills, Jimmy says, "People have to be worth their titles." This is a multifaceted line in the context of this conversation and also a driving part of Jimmy's psychology. He refuses to call Curly captain and doesn't let Anya do it either, implying that Curly is unworthy of his title. He also uses this quote to belittle Anya. Anya is not worthy of her title either. On top of all of that, Jimmy seems adamant that he is now the captain, a title he was never officially given, and he seems to be heavily motivated to prove that he is worth this title. He demands that other people give him the title he desires. Throughout all of Jimmy's interactions, we see him spiral out of control purely out of a desire to prove he is worth a title that is entirely arbitrary to the situation he's in. Jimmy puts everyone in danger just to feel like the captain, even if it's the captain of a crashed ship in the middle of space. Above all else, Jimmy wants to climb a ladder, even if it's a broken ladder in the middle of nowhere. This isn't a metaphor I'm making, the game will use this symbolism later. Anya leaves the room as Jimmy gives Curly his medication. Jimmy remarks that pain is how we know we're still living. Following Anya, she asks why Curly did it, implying he was responsible for the crash. Jimmy asks what answer could possibly make things better, but Anya says she has to believe our worst moments don't make us monsters. This quote is central to Anya's story, and once again we'll return to it later. Jimmy says Curly tried to take them all down with him, implying that he's bitter towards Curly. However, he also remarks that the entire crew agreed to keep Curly alive, so it seems Jimmy does hold some love for Curly, even though he's highly critical of him. Headed downstairs towards the cockpit through the foam-filled innards of the Tulpar, Jimmy can meet Swansea, who is refusing entrance to the utility room, commenting that it's full of foam and he's trying to clear it out. Jimmy asks if Swansea is going to let Daisuke work in there. Daisuke is his intern after all, but Swansea says that's out of the question. Swansea calls Daisuke a teeny bopper who only thinks with his downstairs long nose, which is a really odd way to put it. Swansea's refusal to give Daisuke a chance is mirrored later in Jimmy and Curly's relationship, which could explain why, despite Swansea and Jimmy both being dismissive of the rest of the crew, they don't get on. We'll learn later that Curly brought Jimmy on as an apprentice and effectively gave him free rein, but Swansea is a lot more strict with his inexperienced intern. Jimmy is all about doing whatever he wants, but Swansea is big into rules and responsibility, at least at this point. To put it more simply, Swansea is driven by responsibility, Jimmy is not. Obtaining the code scanner from the cockpit, Jimmy heads to the cargo hold where the crew waits for him. Daisuke says he and Swansea can repair the ship with parts, but Swansea tells him to stop yapping. Anya hopes for medicine, food or water, but before we can learn the mystery of what the Tulpar is carrying, the game flashes back this time to 7 days before the crash. 7 days prior to the crash, the Tulpar is not marked for death by orange twilight. Instead, it is bathed in optimistic blue sky. No longer are we playing as Jimmy, the captain of a doomed ship. Instead, we are Curly, the capable and respected captain of the Tulpar. Curly has just barely passed a psych eval given by Anya and is suffering from insomnia. Jimmy is the only crew member to not complete a proper psych eval, instead giving Anya only joke answers about his sexual attraction to cartoon horses. Curly decides that he will do Jimmy's exam, commenting that he's known him for a long time. Unlike Jimmy, Curly doesn't need to tell people he's the captain. Anya shows clear respect and refers to him by his title. Swansea sends Curly a note saying that he can't perform miracles, showcasing frustration about something happening in the utility room. Headed down to the utility room, Curly meets Jimmy, who is delighting in watching Swansea and Daisuke struggle. Curly says the Tulpar is showing her age, but Jimmy says it passed inspection so should be fine. Here the Tulpar mirrors Curly, and it's safe to say, even this early, that the Tulpar is a representation of Curly. He's the captain of the Tulpar, but more than that, both he and the ship are relics of a bygone age of Pony Express. Both are showing signs of wear and tear and deterioration, and the ship and Curly are both damaged beyond repair during the crash. As the game goes on, this connection will be more apparent, but understand from this point onwards, anything relating to the tulpa is symbolic of Curly. Curly comments that he should have made a bigger stink about Daisuke being added last minute, and not being accounted for when the ship was being supplied. This shows that Curly is capable of knowing when he's being taken for an idiot, but rarely does he have the capacity to stand up for himself and point out things he thinks are wrong. In Utility, Daisuke is trapped in foam after a mishap, with Curly needing to free him using a fireman's axe, which he then hands over to Swansea. Swansea comments that safety has gone overboard and that back in his day they didn't have to go through a dog and pony show to get anything. Safety is a priority on board the tulpa, but the safety is almost always to corporate assets and not to the crew. There are only locks on Utility and the cockpit, and things that can damage the ship are locked up, only the captain can get them out. The captain is in a massive position of power on the tulpa, they have access to literally everything, whilst everyone else is massively restricted, they can't even make food in the kitchen. If Curly were to be incapacitated prior to Daisuke getting covered in foam or having another accident in Utility, then no one would be able to help him. On the way to conduct Jimmy's psyche eval, the tulpa distorts, mirroring Curly's mental state. An endless corridor which falls into a puddle of water beneath the stars from which broken ladders rise before being bathed in sunlight. The ladders, symbolic of corporate advancement, a source of so much obsession to Curly and Jimmy, are broken and abandoned. Eventually getting to the cockpit, Jimmy's psyche eval goes fine and then the pair talk about the job. Curly hired Jimmy because they were friends, in spite of Jimmy having issues back on Earth. Jimmy likes the job because they're in control here, although he's envious that he has to hear about how great Curly is. Jimmy spots Curly looking upset and asks him why he seems like he's always stood on the edge of a cliff with his feet in cement. Curly comments that he feels lost, unsure if he should keep going just because he's good at something, or if he should be brave enough to try and do something, knowing he might be bad at it. Curly says, "Am I figured out? Is this all I'll ever be? Or do I take the risk and try something new, even if I'm bad at it?" Jimmy equates this to being at the top of a ladder only to realise the ladder isn't the one you want to be on, before saying he's a long way from the top and still climbing, again showing hints of envy. Jimmy's assessment makes sense, and Curly says it's something like that, but as we saw from Curly's vision, he believes all the ladders are broken and submerged. Curly isn't just disillusioned with his job, he's straight up depressed, and through visual metaphors we understand he doesn't believe there's such a thing as a fulfilling job, a non-broken ladder. He views himself as wandering alone in an endless void of stars littered with dead ends. Curly puts on a brave face for the crew, but he's falling apart. He's in the throes of a depressive episode so severe that he feels cynical about everything. However, before he can really open up, a letter comes in from the superiors at Pony Express, horrifying Curly with its contents. Headed upstairs to meet with the crew, the screen flashes with the message "Take responsibility," and Curly again begins to hallucinate, seeing a TV set ahead of him. Here Curly needs to take responsibility for the company's actions and relay it to the crew, part of his job. However, take responsibility flashes on screen a lot throughout the game, so let's add a third theme. Mouthwashing is about responsibility. Hidden in the TV room is the bandaged Curly, showcasing Curly feeling somewhat aware of the doomed fate that awaits him. He's completely given up, as he looks at his own scarred future self which watches him from the edges of his mind. The contents of the TV are all relevant to understanding the game, and none were made specifically for mouthwashing, so let's talk about all the footage here, its original context and how it relates to this game. The TV segment opens with the 1948 propaganda film Going Places, an animated short about
the marvels of free enterprise,
where a boy called Freddy who wants to fish is made to make soap by his mother. Wanting more time to fish, he develops a faster way to make soap, becoming a successful businessman. Freddy spends years, his entire youth, believing that being higher on the corporate ladder will give him more time to do whatever he wants. However, whilst Freddy does become successful after beating out all of his opponents, he never actually goes fishing in the end. After years and years of work, he gets a chance to go fishing, with the narrator commenting that now he has all the time he wants to go fishing on Saturdays, a single day off a week, his reward for years of work. But before he can make it out to the fishing spot, he's put back to work by the disembodied voice to try and impress a woman. The narrator comments,
"Hopelessly in love, he wants to make good in a big way. So back to work."
Freddy spends so much time trying to climb the ladder and do what the voice tells him that he never actually gets to do what he wants, the predicament that Curly is in now. Simply put, Curly would much rather be fishing. Curly himself explains this in the DLC for How Fish is Made called The Last One and Then Another, where he makes an appearance and gives dialogues that the developers have confirmed to be canon to Mouthwashing. In this title, Curly remarks, "It's easy to get on this boat when you have to. You say to yourself, this is just temporary, just until I get what I need. I've got bigger things planned." Then suddenly you're 1 year in, 5 years, 10. First I couldn't stand the constant noise. Now I can't sleep without it. A lot of things can't follow you out here, but it also means the outside world moves on without you. Won't even notice until it's too late. Easy to get on, hard to leave. Curly and Anya are both victims of exploitation. Both are used purely as objects to advance the aims of someone else, and both are made to feel small and miserable for it. But whilst for Anya it's on a personal level, for Curly it's the influence of Pony Express. Curly has spent his entire life getting all of his value from a job he doesn't even like. In theory he could just leave, but as we'll soon learn, manned flight is a dying industry and Pony Express are one of the only companies still doing it. There isn't anywhere for him to go without getting extremely lucky or starting from the bottom of a ladder again, and he might be in the exact same predicament. The just get a job somewhere else idea just doesn't work for him. He's an aging professional in a dead industry with no connections he can leverage into employment the same way Jimmy leveraged him. On top of that, Curly is robbed of a life by Pony Express. He's made to go on extensive trips where his only human interaction is with a small crew of 3 to 5 individuals. Curly isn't ever given a chance to be anything more than he's expected to be. He and Anya have parallel arcs in this sense. The next 2 pieces of footage relate to the themes of existentialism that haunt Curly. First is a 2011 animation released by NASA to demonstrate NASA's swift satellite spotting a black hole devouring a star, highlighting human insignificance, the end of a solar system. The second is the 1953 documentary A is for Atom, created to educate about the similarities between the solar system and atomic structure, which evokes themes of just how small each human life is. Curly often sees himself alone beneath a sea of stars, insignificant, and he's slipping further into that mindset here. Following this, there is footage of a slaughterhouse, which can be taken in many ways, but it is best understood within the context of what comes next, being the 1948 anti-communist cartoon Make Mine Freedom. In this cartoon, a group of people drink a tonic labelled Ism offered by a snake oil salesman. It gives them higher wages, better quality of life, but it requires them to sign away their freedom, before being granted a vision of the future where they are controlled by a giant iron hand representing the state. This is incredibly heavy-handed. It's literally heavy-handed. After seeing this vision, they chase the salesman out of town, ending collectivist ideology in America once and for all. Hooray! This footage juxtaposed with the live-action slaughterhouse footage shows the reality of things versus the propagandist message pushed by companies like Pony Express. In fact, across the board, Curly sees all the positive messages of progress and development and capital as cartoons, whilst most of all of the upsetting subject matter is shown in live action. This is not to say this is the correct way to view things, but it's how Curly feels at this point in the story. Curly sees a cartoon world of free market idealism and then the brutal reality of it. Workers are the meat. Their rejection of any kind of ism, in favour of a vague notion of freedom, has allowed them all to become dejected individualists, and when it's every man for himself, you are either butcher or you are butchered. We see this with Jimmy, a man who values his individual freedom and position within the corporate hierarchy above all else. In Guy Debord's The Society of the Spectacle, he writes, all individual reality has become social reality, directly dependent on social power and shaped by it. The argument here is that when your entire self-worth and worldview is based on your social position and your material goods, you end up being defined as a person by what you believe is befitting of your social status. Everything you do is a performance of class. Jimmy wants to be captain. He says repeatedly that people have to be worth their titles. He desires this because this is a role that is butcher and not meat. As such, his behaviour across the board is defined by what he believes a captain would act like, and he's more than willing to butcher people he views as being below him on the ladder, in some cases quite literally. It's this same obsession with social power that Curly is now seeing the issues with, the broken ladders of advancement haunting his waking nightmares, whilst his brain is working overtime with propaganda to try and correct him, to offset the more negative imagery that haunts his thoughts. The meat has deeper symbolic meaning relating to Curly, because throughout the game Curly is reduced to meat. Not only does this tie into everything we've mentioned, but it's also a subversion of the common sentiment that women are treated like meat in the eyes of men. Casting a male character in this role showcases the universality of suffering at the hands of certain ideals. More on this later. After this, we see the 1898 film The Merry Skeleton, which shows a skeleton marionette dancing. Symbolic of Curly, a directionless puppet of a dead man going through the motions for the entertainment of his crew. Earlier, Jimmy said that Pony Express's in-flight entertainment was the suffering of the crew, Daisuke and Swansea at that time, but over time Curly's marionette will become Jimmy's favourite plaything. Finally, we are treated to a trailer for Dragon Breath X Mouthwash, the item the ship is carrying. This trailer includes terms and conditions which say you should consult with your dentist before, during and after using Dragon Breath X, which is amazing. So why mouthwash? Well, to understand, let's just jump forward with the game to when the crew open the cargo, 2 months into being stranded. Realising that the Tulpar is carrying mouthwash garners different reactions from each crew member. Jimmy can't believe all of this as being for mouthwash. Anya comments on how it has too much sugar to be used as a disinfectant. Swansea notes that the mouthwash is 14% ethanol and bursts out laughing, with Daisuke sheepishly joining in, not understanding what's so funny. Anya begs him to stop, but Swansea begins chugging mouthwash. Editor's note: don't drink mouthwash, it's bad for you. Mouthwash was decided early in development to be the item in the hold. The quote from the developer Q&A is as follows. Mouthwash was the first idea, but we briefly considered hand sanitizer, rubbing alcohol, or just straight up hard liquor. Mouthwash just has that vibe of being the worst and most absurd option, plus the bottles could have a recognisable design. We considered having a few variants of different flavours, but the uniformity of all the bottles being the exact same kinda adds to the sad horror of it all. The mouthwash tastes like blue. Dragon Breath mouthwash serves numerous roles in the story. It's got alcohol content, which facilitates its role for Swansea. Its potential usage as a disinfectant is also brought up a few times. Later in the game, the Tulpar is represented as a giant mouth, so being full of mouthwash frames the fates of the crew as a kind of cleansing. On top of all of that, the mouthwash is, as the devs stated, absurd. Jimmy's words highlight just how absurdly tragic this is. All of this? For mouthwash? The absurdity of the cargo just adds to how utterly bizarre the situation is. Jimmy does everything he does to fight and claw his way up to the role of a captain of a rusty old ship hauling mouthwash. So, for a fourth theme we can add to our list, mouthwashing is about absurdism. Not just the absurd as in the state of a single thing being meaningless or bizarre, but rather the philosophical theory of absurdism. Absurdism is actually a pretty nebulous term, so I'm talking specifically about Camusian absurd. Albert Camus' absurdism is the struggle or inability to find inherent meaning in life due to life not having any absolute meanings or values. In the myth of Sisyphus, Camus writes, "There exists an obvious fact that seems utterly moral, namely that a man is always prey to his truths. Once he is admitted to them, he cannot free himself from them. One has to pay something. A man who has become conscious of the absurd is forever bound to it. A man devoid of hope and conscious of being so has ceased to belong to the future. That is natural. But it is just as natural that he should strive to escape from the universe of which he is the creator." Already at this stage in mouthwashing, we see the parallels between Curly, Swansea and Jimmy within the context of this quote. Curly is aware of his truths, but is devoid of hope. He has ceased to belong to the future. Swansea is aware of his truths and comes to take ownership of his life. Jimmy, however, has not admitted to his own truths. He has not done the first step in confronting the absurd. When the game bombards him with messages to take responsibility, he's oblivious to them. Jimmy's own absurdity is not something he's conscious of, largely because he's so invested in the spectacle. Viewing this through a Debordian lens, Jimmy's individual reality is shaped by social reality, so his individual truths are distorted and thus invisible to him. The game highlights this by making him so obsessed with captaining a ship that is quite explicitly a sad prize not worth the struggle. The cargo is part of this messaging. Jimmy cannot see the absurdity in the fact that he is selling his soul for a consolation prize. Famously, Camus said in this work that one must imagine Sisyphus happy, but in being happy without being conscious of the absurd, one is not truly happy, rather complicit. Camus takes pains to explain that in order to truly embrace the absurd, one must first be conscious of it. They must understand the contradictions inherent in their own mind. Jimmy does not. Perhaps one must imagine Sisyphus kind of not knowing what's going on. Following this segment, we flash back to 6 days before the crash. Curly heads upstairs to find himself at his surprise birthday party. On board the Tulpa, there's only enough supplies for one birthday party per trip. This time, it's Curly's turn. However, due to restrictions on board, only the captain can make the cake, so Curly has to make his own. Making a cake, and potentially a cocktail, and bringing it to the table, Curly is advised to make a speech. Here he breaks some awful news. Pony Express is stopping manned flights, and this will be the crew's last job. Swansea is quite accepting of this truth, saying the writing's been on the wall for a while, but Anya doesn't have any savings and will be in a horrible situation if she loses this job. Over the rest of the game we'll know even more as to why being jobless would be terrible for Anya specifically, and we also know from developer Q&As that she's failed numerous nursing exams and her Pony Express nursing license is valid only on the Tulpa and other Pony Express property. She can't practice her profession anywhere else. Jimmy immediately turns on Curly and tries to galvanise the crew to support him in attacking Curly. He throws Curly's attempt to support him from their earlier conversation back at him before bringing up the other crew's problems. On top of this, Jimmy manufactures a narrative that Curly is onto bigger and better things. This isn't true. The developers have confirmed that Curly was losing his job alongside all of them and would at best get a reference. Curly breaks here, saying that he's working on trying to make his life a place he doesn't want to escape, but Jimmy ignores him and says that the crew is what Curly's trying to escape. Instead of referring to Curly as a person, he continues talking about how Curly wants to be the model captain, again highlighting an obsession with titles, roles and rules, and how deserving people are of them. Jimmy toasts to the Twilight cruise at the Tulpa, foreshadowing the Twilight symbolism after the crash. Following this, Curly has to awkwardly cut his own cake as everyone cries or sulks around him, and we jump forward to 3 months after the crash. Jimmy wakes up to find Anya and Swansea nowhere to be found. Believing Anya might be with Curly, he heads to the medical bay, but she isn't there. Headed downstairs, he finds her in the cockpit speaking with Swansea. We overhear the end of a conversation with Anya telling Swansea if that's how it has to be, before they spot Jimmy and stop. Jimmy tries to exert himself as captain, telling them they should be asleep. Swansea throws the captain title back at him, almost like an insult. Jimmy then notices that Anya is crying and asks if she's given Curly his medicine, potentially trying to pull her away from Swansea so that he can inquire further as to what is wrong with her. Jimmy also notices that Swansea is now wielding the fireman's axe. Following Swansea and Anya's conversation, Swansea is almost always armed for the remainder of the game. So what were they talking about? Well, I think it's pretty clear to anyone that's played the game that Anya is telling Swansea about Jimmy and some of the things he's done. And what she says prompts Swansea to arm himself for protection, not just for himself but also for the rest of the crew. However, there's also a chance that Swansea is telling Anya about his project in the utility room, the one that he doesn't let anyone else see. Jimmy heads back upstairs and gives Curly his medication before saying, "I hope this makes you feel fucking better." We then get audio of Jimmy beating Curly before reality slips away and Jimmy begins to hallucinate. Jimmy beats Curly here for numerous reasons. Primarily, Jimmy just likes being in a position of power. It's the main thing he said he liked about the job. Secondly, Jimmy is frustrated about Anya and Swansea's conversation. He's worried that Swansea has heard bad things about him, and he's worried that this bad impression will make it harder for him to be captain. But Jimmy can't attack Swansea or Anya because Swansea is armed, and Swansea is with Anya. Even when Swansea isn't with Anya, she can almost always be found in medical or the cockpit, the 2 rooms in the ship which have locks. So he attacks Curly, because Curly can't fight back. Curly also represents the impossible ideal of a good captain, and Jimmy wants to dehumanize him and strip him of this so it'll be easier to rise into his role. Violence is a release for Jimmy and it helps him cope with his insecurities. Jimmy is angry at the world for not giving him the things he feels like he deserves, so he lashes out to try and take what he wants by force and pull others down to his level. Entering into a surreal dream, Jimmy is haunted by the emergency crash warning on the TV screen, and the message "Take responsibility" scrambles in front of him. Guilt is manifesting itself as Curly watches on, now sitting at a table in front of a birthday cake. Jimmy says the cake is mediocre, but Curly comments sometimes you can only get the subpar stuff. Curly seems much more accepting of his fate here. His prior anxieties have faded away, and he's accepting that a subpar life and not getting what he wants is fine. However, it's important to note that this isn't the real Curly. This is the version of Curly that exists in Jimmy's head. Jimmy is absolving himself of guilt by using Curly as the voice of his conscience. He comments that they all tried to escape, and refers to Jimmy, the man who just beat him, as his best friend. He also talks about sometime he wants to get promoted or buy a house, again mirroring Jimmy's mindset more than the mindset we know Curly to have. Headed to the cockpit, Jimmy finds the fireman's axe embedded into the captain's chair, showcasing his subconscious fear of Swansea, which has got to him since the interaction in the cockpit. Taking the axe, eyes appear all over the screens. This is reflective of the real Curly, the singular judging eye watching Jimmy's descent into madness, the eye that now looks up as Jimmy beats him. These eyes appear all over the Tulpa, further showing the connections between Curly and the ship. The more Curly deteriorates and is mistreated, the more unsafe and broken the ship becomes. The ship begins to reject Jimmy, the more Curly rejects him. This eye also appears when Jimmy walks back upstairs to sit with Curly. Instead of the cake, you can now find Curly laid out on the table, the mission objective now a single word: feast. So, why does Jimmy eat Curly? Cannibalism is a subject with myriad symbolic meanings, often associated with utterly subsuming another being. This can be for love, for lust, to dominate, or to completely obliterate. Cannibalism has been used as a metaphor for the effects of capitalism or generally uneven relationship dynamics in numerous works, notably the dystopian novel Tender as the Flesh, where it's kind of both of those things. However, I don't think it's quite that far-sprawling here. Jimmy eats Curly because Jimmy wants to utterly own and control Curly. Jimmy's number one motivator for everything is power, especially power over others, and a big part of that is dominating others physically. Jimmy eats Curly because he wants Curly to be helpless and entirely at his disposal. It's a fantasy of his. If we look back at the TV segment, there's a subconscious belief that one is either the butcher or the butchered being highlighted, and a lot more emphasis is on Jimmy cutting up Curly than actually eating him. It's the butchery and not the cannibalism that's the emphasis here. It ties back to the earlier message. On top of that, Curly takes the place of the cake. The cake was celebrating Curly previously. It was also something only the captain could make then cut. In replacing the cake with Curly, Jimmy is rewarding himself with a captain's reward by eating the previous captain. However, as he begins to cut into Curly, time flashes forward to 4 months after the crash, Jimmy now conscious of reality. Heading up from below deck, Jimmy finds Swansea dancing, clearly drunk off of mouthwash. Swansea continues to only call Jimmy captain and jest or to highlight him messing up. Anya meanwhile is sat at the table, considering drinking mouthwash herself. The purifying nature of the mouthwash within the symbolic mouth of the Tulpa is highlighted when Anya is framed between 2 bottles, showcasing the fact that dragon breath kills 99.9% of germs. Speaking with Jimmy, Anya brings up an extra medicine locker stuck behind foam, which might have some more painkillers in it. Once again, Anya is bringing up a plan and Jimmy starts to dismiss it. He then realises that the plan will get the axe off of Swansea, so he agrees. Swansea won't immediately give over the axe. It was given to him by the prior captain and he says it's a big responsibility. Swansea is highly conscious of responsibility after all. However, when Jimmy says he wants to do something useful, Swansea snaps and says how he's heard all about Jimmy, and how he thinks Jimmy wants to pull the plug on everyone early. Swansea then drives the axe into the screen, smashing the twilight before sitting down and letting Jimmy take it as he laughs about the ship hurtling through space. Jimmy takes the axe and finds more painkillers before Anya asks him to give Curly his medicine. Jimmy explodes with anger here, recalling all of the previous mission objectives she's given with fury, before concluding the rant with the line, "The captain has to take full responsibility." The screen flashes with the message as he says it. Jimmy is failing as a captain in his own eyes and is scrambling to do as much as he can to live up to his self-imposed title. Speaking with Curly, Jimmy tells him how he feels the same pressures Curly did. He comments how Curly tried to tell him, as in Curly tried to explain how difficult being captain was, but that wasn't what Curly was trying to say. Curly was trying to express a greater sense of disillusionment, and Jimmy has twisted it in his own mind to become this self-pitying "my job is so hard" thing. Jimmy then takes Anya's words, "Our worst moments don't make us monsters," and instead of reflecting on it and applying it to himself, he talks about how he no longer judges Curly for Curly's worst moments, admitting that he was a good captain. Jimmy then says, "And you will be one again," which shows him slipping into the delusion that he can save everyone, even Curly, and somehow Curly will make a full recovery and be put back to work as a captain. But Curly doesn't want to do that anymore. Jimmy's ideal world just sees Curly put right back to work in a job he doesn't want. He's not listening to anyone, he's just entrenching himself in his delusions. All of a sudden, mid-conversation, we flash forward to a segment marked 6 hours before Judgement. Jimmy is hiding in the cockpit. Swansea is screaming at him as he chases him with a fireman's axe. Within Jimmy's inventory is a blanked out item with the description, "My hands can't stop shaking." It seemed inevitable, but now it's come to it. These two are trying to kill each other. Jimmy barricades the door as Swansea frantically tries to get in, before we cut back to 2 days before the crash. The night sky scene with Curly and Anya is one of the most profound in the game. It's my personal favourite, and it's where a lot of this game's thematic threads come together. Neither Anya or Curly can sleep. As I stated in the discussion of the TV section, both are mentally exhausted and falling apart after being used without any concern for what they actually want. Anya says that she likes the nighttime screen, but if you look closely there's a dead pixel in the top right corner. Curly can't see it, but she's sure of its existence, going as far as to say, "In the back of my mind it's always there." Curly says he doesn't mind the dead pixel because it doesn't ruin the illusion for him. He's more concerned with the big picture anyway. Anya asks how many days of transport they have left, and Curly says around 237 days, just under 8 months. Anya asks why there's a lock in the medical room but not in the sleeping quarters, and Curly responds with safety as the screen flashes with the word and the scene ends. So, to spell it out plainly, for those who haven't figured it out or didn't pick up on it, Anya is a victim of sexual abuse at the hands of Jimmy. Not only does he talk down to her and verbally degrade her, which has only got worse since he became captain, but he has been sexually assaulting her and now she's looking for ways to tell Curly. This is all but confirmed in the later scene, but by this point you should already be clued in that not everything is okay with Anya. Anya is confused as to why her safety isn't prioritised over medicine or items in the cockpit, and is increasingly conscious of the dead pixel. The dead pixel represents Jimmy's worst traits, but also misogyny in the abstract, all the ways in which the world is set up against her, an ever-present realisation that haunts the back of her mind. Curly, in contrast, is not willing to see it, and comments that even if he was conscious of it, then the greater illusion would be fine for him. This is true of both his opinions on Jimmy and misogyny as a whole. Curly isn't a direct victim, so he can overlook it. Bear in mind that Anya is effectively trapped working on board the Tulpa. She has no savings and a nursing license that is only valid when working for Pony Express, and Curly has brought his friend, who already had unspecified problems on Earth, into this space. This is one of Curly's worst moments, but Anya has to believe that it doesn't make him a monster because Anya genuinely likes Curly. They're friends, they crack jokes together, and they've been on numerous flights as a team. Anya's belief that people's worst moments don't define them isn't something she has to believe to deal with Jimmy, it's something she has to believe to deal with Curly too. However, no amount of positive thinking can purge her mind of the dead pixel. Once she's conscious of it, she can't escape it, it's always there in the back of her mind. But if Jimmy had these problems already back on Earth, then why did Curly bring him on board? Well, he explains in the last one and then another with the following dialogue. Next comes spite. First it stares back at you in the mirror, then it's those around you. They're wearing your face and you theirs. You know, he joined because of me. What were the words I used? Right. It's a great opportunity. Easy money, just a trip or two. Someone else's words in my mouth. Hey, worked on me as well, right? Change hurts, but worse things fester for a long time. I told him as much. I tried, I really did. We're defined by our past, but not slaves to it. We said tomorrow will be different. Tomorrow will be the last day. The last one, and then another. And another, and another, and another. Curly didn't believe Jimmy would be defined by his past. He wanted to give him a chance to escape consequence. Even later, when Anya outright tells Curly what happened to her, he continues to defend Jimmy with the argument, "I've known him for a long time," or "I can fix this." On top of that, Curly as he is now, wearing the face of Pony Express, just cares about getting the job done. He wants the easy money, he's not really concerned with the safety of the crew. Curly, the captain, wearing the face of Pony Express, is abstracted so far from Curly the man. This same distinction is made within Jimmy's visions, where he's haunted by the watchful eye of Curly the man, but spoken to kindly by Curly the captain. This is one of the biggest commentaries Mouthwashing wants to push. It's extremely critical of rape culture and its perpetuation. So for a fifth theme, Mouthwashing is about misogyny. Rape Crisis England and Wales, a charity organisation working to end SA, at least in England and Wales, defines rape culture as the following. Rape culture is a culture where sexual violence and abuse is normalised and played down, where it is accepted, excused, laughed off, or not challenged enough by society as a whole. Rape culture is also a culture where some people are making money or benefiting in some other way from this normalisation of sexual violence and abuse. All of this can be a hard thing to get your head around to begin with. You might be thinking, but of course most people don't think sexual violence and abuse is okay. And you might be right, in theory. The problem is, in reality, this just isn't true, and the facts exist to prove it. According to statistics compiled by this charity in March of 2025, so very recently, all of which can be found linked below and I encourage you to read, approximately 1 in 4 women have been SA'd since the age of 16, but very few go about actually reporting the crime. There are numerous reasons for this, like the police not really being very useful, but a major reason is men being complicit in other men committing acts of sexual violence. Often when a woman comes forward with an allegation of violence, the immediate reaction is frantic searching for what she did to deserve it, or what might possibly absolve the, usually, male perpetrator. Curly has a critique of this. He cannot see the dead pixel, and when his attention is called to it, he brushes it off with comments about how he can only see the big picture. Curly doesn't see what is happening right before his eyes because he refuses to see Jimmy for what he really is. It's only when Curly's only working body part is his eye that he can see what's been going on, by which point Curly's bodily autonomy has also been robbed of him, mirroring Anya. It takes an experience from the male perspective to make Curly see what Anya has been through. There's a reason why most of Anya and Jimmy's dialogue takes place in front of Curly. He's made to watch Jimmy's treatment of her, but he can't move or speak out. His fate mirrors his earlier attitude. When Kasurin says that she wants people to play this game and wants it to hurt, I think it's meant to hurt people like Curly a lot more than people like Jimmy. The game is extremely critical of how damaging willful ignorance is. Jimmy is the clear villain of the piece, yes, but he can only exist with Curly allowing him to. The narrative is most critical not of Jimmy, but of Curly. He's the one who suffers the most consequences, he's the one the game wants to take responsibility, but he never did, and now he never can, and he spends most of the game as a passive onlooker to all of the things he could have stopped. 5 months into the crash, Anya cracks. Daisuke rushes to Jimmy to let him know that she's stuck in medical, but a brief conversation shows that she isn't stuck. She's locked herself inside. Jimmy is terrified, not for Anya's safety, but that she might harm Curly. At this point, Curly is more of an idea than a person to Jimmy, the image of the perfect captain, so any damage to Curly is an attack on Jimmy's identity. Anya says, "You were right, I should have done this from the beginning," before saying that she always believed people's worst moments don't make them monsters, but this isn't her worst. Far from it, it's the best decision of her life. The implication here is that Anya is planning to commit suicide, and her repeating of "you were right" implies that Jimmy has hinted that she should do this previously. Anya concludes this conversation by saying, "I'll take care of it," turning Jimmy's words against him as he has done to her so many times, taking agency in her final moments. Desperate to get into medical, again to protect Curly, not help Anya at all, Jimmy gets Daisuke to tell him about the internals of the ship. There's a hatch that leads to medical in the utility room, but Swansea doesn't let anyone in. Outside utility, Swansea brushes off the pair, still drunkenly chattering. He names the orbital body they crashed on Wake Rock. Wake calling to mind the funerary tradition of holding a party of sorts to commemorate a death. Swansea is holding a wake on the rock. He's celebrating the death of the crew. Jimmy says that he and Daisuke should just go and that there's no point with Swansea, they should just work out a way around him. However, pulling Daisuke away from Swansea and into Jimmy's orbit seals his fate, as the game jumps forward and we see Daisuke bleeding out on the floor 8 hours before Judgement. Jimmy and Swansea stand over Daisuke as he bleeds out. Jimmy is talking about fixing Daisuke, clinging to his role as a capable captain, while Swansea is searching for solutions. Swansea mentions getting disinfectant, but Jimmy implies he's already used it, before muttering something about it being Swansea's fault that there's no disinfectant. Swansea calls him an idiot and tells him to find something, establishing himself as the more experienced and collected individual whilst Jimmy clings desperately to his role. In medical there's a blur where Curly and Anya are, leaving their fates ambiguous for now. Deep in the ship, reality begins to slip again, and Jimmy finds himself in a maze-like series of walkways over a great void. Above, A giant horse watches on, a giant horse with a blind eye. A note lies nearby which reads, "A blind beast, aimless and restless, you cannot run from it." In order to enter this walkway, Jimmy must use the code scanner, a symbol of his role as captain, on a grave of a hibiscus flower, the flower on Daisuke's shirt. Pretty obvious visual shorthand for how Jimmy's attempts at being captain have killed Daisuke. Returning to the note on the beast, it could represent quite a few things. Aimless, restless, and something you can't run from. It could represent Jimmy and his behaviour. The crew can't escape, they're trapped on the ship, but Jimmy can't escape it either. He has to live with himself and is beginning to crack as he desperately looks for ways to absolve himself of guilt. Symbolically, this is a role reversal, with Jimmy cast in the role of Anya. He has to move quietly and not draw attention, or else draw in aimless acts of violence. The fact that at the end of this section there is a model of Polle strengthens this, because later in the game we will see that Polle is a symbol of Jimmy's guilt over what he did to Anya. Or, the blind beast could be Curly, hovering over Jimmy but not actually directly opposing him as long as he doesn't make too much noise. There's also an argument to be made that the blind beast represents Pony Express itself. Aimless and restless, blind, it looks only to reign over its domain and attack those who make too much noise. This creature will not attack you if you stay silent, and it roams the cargo hold, a place the workers aren't supposed to go. At the end of this section, Jimmy grabs some mouthwash, and we flash back to 5 months after the crash when Jimmy and Daisuke are trying to get into the utility room. In order to get into medical to save Curly, Daisuke and Jimmy resort to knocking Swansea out. In order to do this, they need to make a laced cocktail. Daisuke is unsure of the idea, but is convinced by Jimmy. Jimmy makes a cocktail using a modified cocktail recipe which incorporates mouthwash and isopropyl, the disinfectant which we know cannot save Daisuke due to its usage here. Jimmy goes to give Swansea the cocktail, and Swansea opens the conversation with the line, "You taken to teaching my intern now? I personally try to educate based off years of experience, but that's just me, Captain." This line perfectly encapsulates the core of the conflict between Jimmy and Swansea. Swansea can see through Jimmy, he knows he doesn't have the experience or ability to lead. He only ever calls him Captain as a thinly veiled insult. However, Swansea, who thinks dying is better than not getting paid, will submit himself to the systems in place regardless of how stupid he thinks they are. Swansea is set to break at a certain point, but much like with booze, he has a very high tolerance for bullshit. Swansea then directs his attention to Daisuke. He says he isn't a mechanic before saying that Daisuke never should have come here and shouldn't have been allowed on board. Stick the idiot with a bunch of sad sack adults and see what he learns. Bootstraps and all that. What a load of horse shit. He projects himself into Daisuke, commenting that even if the crew survive, work in this field will only make Daisuke older, uglier, and meaner. Smarter in a worse way. Jimmy says wallowing doesn't suit Swansea, but Swansea bites back with the quote, "I suppose you think everyone should be like you, a hard-working, esteemed captain. I say take a load off before the sun finally sets on this party." So Swansea spells it all out plainly here, all the game's central points on responsibility and the nature of corporate culture. He just lays it out. He outright calls the concept of pulling yourself up by the bootstraps and working hard horse shit, which is a damning remark, but also the use of horse implies this lie is perpetuated by Pony Express. It's pony shit. Swansea is projecting his own problems onto Daisuke, but I don't think Daisuke is meant to be a young Swansea as much as he's meant to mirror Curly. Quote from the developer Q&A. Daisuke really didn't want to do the internship. His parents made him go because he'd been kind of aimless so far as a young adult. They thought it'd ultimately help him find his way in life, to have some time in a stricter environment and away from home. They were just worried for his future. When he does end up on the Tolpa, while at first anguished, he eventually decides to put on a brave face and try his best to make his parents proud. Daisuke is effectively a younger, less cynical Curly. Daisuke did not want to be on the ship, but he ended up there anyway. He was sold in a lie the same way Curly was, and so were his parents. They believed that shipping him off into a dying industry would somehow equate to having a direction in life, buying into the spectacle. But like Curly, even if Daisuke survived, he'd be in the same predicament. Stuck in a job that's going nowhere and a job market that's increasingly removing human involvement. Once again, they can't get direction just from getting a job. There's a marked difference between social and individual purpose. Daisuke's predicament of being torn between two mentors can then be seen as Curly's memory and ideals being fought over by Swansea and Jimmy. Jimmy wants Daisuke to be a good worker, to remain complicit in hierarchy and follow orders, while Swansea wants Daisuke to survive and get a chance to live even if his life is aimless and completely without direction. Curly was the same. He could continue to build up an image as a good worker and captain, or he could take the leap into aimlessness and see if he could do better. Daisuke can swing either way because, like Curly, he's highly influenced by others with little ability to speak for himself. His shirt is decorated with a pink hibiscus flower. In Hanakotoba, the Japanese language of flowers, this flower can be interpreted to mean trust. His name, Daisuke, can also be written numerous ways in kanji, but one of the most common incorporates the kanji for assist, also leaning into his naive nature. Daisuke is a malleable soul, and everything about him only further cements this. Also, unrelated to any kind of analysis, but he's based loosely off Ryusuke Kawashima from Cairo 2001, which is an amazing film and you should watch it. It's a favourite of mine, so if you're into kind of wacky horror stuff, watch it. Last I checked it was like on YouTube, but if you need a movie night, watch Cairo. Upon Swansea being knocked out, Daisuke and Jimmy enter utility. Here they find out what Swansea has been doing down here. A singular cryostasis pod is still functional. Jimmy remarks that Swansea was going to wait for everyone else to die before saving himself. The pod would buy whoever is put inside of it an extra 20 years to get rescued. However, Swansea saving himself doesn't seem likely. Swansea is effectively killing himself with the amount he's drinking, and a good amount of his dialogue is associated with accepting his impending death. So it's more likely that Swansea is saving the pod for either Anya or Daisuke, meaning that he's done more to save the crew than Jimmy has. Once again, Swansea just does his responsibility. He doesn't make a big song and dance about it. Jimmy sends Daisuke through a hole in the roof to get to medical. Daisuke mentions how Swansea knows the ship better than anyone else and has told him this hatch is dangerous, but Jimmy disregards this and makes Daisuke go, saying everyone is counting on you. So Daisuke goes up into the hatch, injuring himself beyond any kind of repair. However, before he collapses, he is able to get into medical and open the door, and the section ends with him asking, Anya, what did you do? One day before the crash, Curly is desperately searching for a missing gun. The same missing gun from the crash in the intro. Anya is lying on the floor in the cockpit, shaking. Curly asks her where the gun is, assuming she's so upset at getting let go that she might hurt herself. Curly notes that as the nurse, Anya never had to do psych evaluations, commenting that he should have thought of that and paid closer attention, and she should have come to him. But Anya asks, what would you have done? As the camera angle changes to show Anya completely alone, surrounded by darkness. Curly says he would have done anything, because the crew are all his responsibility, which we know isn't quite true. Anya says that she can't get into the gun case, but she hid it, trying to keep it out of reach of anyone on board. Curly tries to talk her into giving him the gun before she tells him that she's pregnant. Now confronted with proof of what should have been obvious to him, Curly is just confused, but Anya says, Captain, I told you. Curly should have known he should have done something. He even said himself he would do anything because the crew are his responsibility, but he won't help Anya here. The camera pans to Jimmy and Curly's chairs as Curly says, we can fix this. I've known him for a long time, I'll talk to him. Immediately searching for ways to absolve Jimmy of any guilt or at least hear his side of the story, even when Curly knows that Jimmy is entirely at fault. Anya says she knows that Curly would never give her the gun to protect herself, so all she can do is keep it from Jimmy. Once again, Curly is wearing the face of Pony Express, the face of misogyny. He cares about safety, but only insofar as protecting company assets. He cares about his crew and looks after them, but when the crew are in conflict, he will always take the side of Jimmy over Anya. When given indisputable evidence of Jimmy's crimes, he does absolutely nothing. Curly is so passive, so completely trapped within the systems that define him, that he can't bring himself to do the right thing because the right thing is unknown to him, and that's scary. To speak out against the systems that define him, Curly will be admitting that the ladder is broken and relinquishing his rung at the top. Curly's relationship to his job and his relationship to rape culture are the same. He exists in a comfortable position where he isn't threatened the same way as others, but he doesn't enjoy it. He knows there's probably an alternative, but it's a leap of faith to try and find it, and it could leave him even more directionless than before. Curly is standing on the edge of a cliff with his feet in cement, and all Anya sees is her friend dismissing her. Jimmy can't stop Daisuke's bleeding. Parroting Curly's words, Jimmy says we can fix this, but there's no fix to be found. Jimmy's foolish belief that the captain can do no wrong, that he can be a hero and get everything he wants, has killed Daisuke. He can't recover from this. However, before Daisuke bleeds out completely, Swansea picks up the axe, ready to end his suffering. Before bringing the axe down on Daisuke, Swansea gives him a final speech. Swansea says that Daisuke could never be like him, but implies that that isn't a bad thing, pointing out that a life of working for Pony Express didn't get him anywhere. He concludes his speech with, not an ace student, career workhorse or force of ambition, just a damn good kid trying his best. You could have taught an old fool like me a lot. Close your eyes, Daisuke. Here Swansea is seeing Daisuke for what he is and not what he could be, contrasting Jimmy's obsession with categorizing people by titles. Daisuke is not defined by titles. He's not an A student, career workhorse, or force of ambition. He's just a kid, someone who wants to make friends and make his family proud. Swansea sees this as just as valid an identity as any, even commenting that it could have taught him a lot. Jimmy calls Swansea a monster, a title throughout the game that is used to refer to someone in their worst moments, before saying that he could have fixed Daisuke. Jimmy clings to his role as captain, desperately trying to explain that he can fix things. After all, the crew is the captain's responsibility and Jimmy's just lost one. But Swansea looks up at him and says that it's over, and Daisuke won't suffer anymore because of Jimmy's delusions, again mirroring Curly, who suffers from Jimmy's delusions whilst on life support. Jimmy calls out Swansea for the pod in utility, and sneaking around telling Anya who knows what. But Swansea says it was Anya talking to him, hinting that he knows what Jimmy did. He then says he hasn't got anywhere he needs to be. He has everything he wants on the Tolpar. The pod wasn't for Swansea, he was either saving it for Daisuke, who he views as someone with a future, or Anya, who has a kid to raise that Swansea knows about. But he can't save either now, so he offers the pod to Jimmy. Swansea has conceded defeat, yet immediately upon regaining control of Jimmy, his objective is to get the gun. Jimmy can't tolerate there being someone who sees through him. Even if they were rescued, Swansea could expose what he did, so he's going to kill Swansea. Entering the medical bay, the gun can be found beneath Curly's bed next to Anya's corpse. Anya has overdosed on painkillers. Jimmy gets the code from the cockpit and obtains the gun, before fleeing to the cockpit to hide from Swansea. The mystery item, the one that meant his hands couldn't stop shaking, was the gun. We then flash back to 0 days before the crash. 0 days before the crash and the blue skies are gone. The twilight has descended upon the Tolpar, hanging over the bed where Curly will soon find himself trapped. Anya, now kneeling down in medical, confirms to Curly that she told Jimmy about the pregnancy. Curly says she should have waited for him, but she knows that he wouldn't have been any help. Jimmy is now stormed off and is loose somewhere on the ship. Curly is worried that he might be angry. Anya tries to tell Curly that she doesn't want Jimmy in medical anymore, but Curly cuts her off mid-sentence, giving empty platitudes about how he can fix things. Medical is a safe space for Anya. It has locks, which means safety, and it's her place of work where she can read and study, but Curly lets Jimmy into it and doesn't respect her desire to keep him out. Following Curly's injuries, Jimmy is always wandering into medical to talk to Anya. Anya's space is constantly being invaded by Jimmy and haunted by the spectre of Curly's failings. Jimmy is waiting outside the cockpit, muttering about how annoying it is that Curly is treated as such a great captain. Jimmy talks to him about how being outed as a rapist will impact him and Curly. It'll ruin everything they've worked for. He's placing his job above taking responsibility for his actions and implicating Curly in his crimes. Curly comforts Jimmy, talking about how he's gotten through difficult situations before, which carries the implication that Curly knew Jimmy was doing stuff like this before even bringing him on board. Jimmy pushes all responsibility for his abuse onto Curly, saying, "You were supposed to be the one who had everything under control. You said so yourself. This ship, this crew, everything that happened here. This was your responsibility, Captain." The screen flashes with the take responsibility message again, before flashing with the message take care of it, alongside Dragon Breath's slogan kills 99.9% of germs, as Jimmy convinces Curly to let him take care of it. Jimmy wants to act as the mouthwash, he wants to kill the germs, he wants to cleanse the ship. He wants all traces of his crime to be completely gone and all opposition to him removed. Jimmy then goes and crashes the ship, injuring Curly as he scrambles to fix it. Whilst finding Jimmy outside the cockpit, hallucinating the opening of the game, Curly finally sees what he's done. His dialogue, I should have, I didn't, is the culmination of Curly's tragic story. He finally becomes conscious of how his enabling allowed all this to happen, and as he steps up to finally take responsibility, getting into his captain's chair one last time, the ship collides and Curly is trapped forever as an onlooker. 1 hour before Judgement, Jimmy is carrying Curly through the corridors of the Tolpar towards a macabre birthday party. Anya, Swansea and Daisuke's bodies have been set up around a table where Curly will be presented as the birthday cake. Now completely lost in his delusions, the crew all become animated and start clapping for Jimmy. They all call him Captain and toast to his greatness, as he picks up a knife and begins to hack up Curly, chopping his leg off as the screen distorts. Jimmy has earned the role of butcher, so no longer is he meat. Later in the scene, Jimmy will talk about how Curly had his legs swept out from under him, implying that Curly was just a victim of circumstance. But we can see through the imagery and what actually happened that Curly's legs weren't swept out from under him. Jimmy cut them off. Jimmy speaks to Curly and again twists Curly's words to suit his narrative. Jimmy enviously comments on how the lowest rung of Curly's ladder was their highest, before saying that he forgives him. All of them do. From Jimmy's perspective, this is him forgiving his friend Curly, who he views as responsible for everything. From Curly's perspective, this is a horrifying moment where he is bearing witness to all of his own failings, perhaps realizing how he could have prevented it. Jimmy says that he and Curly are going to make it through this, so Curly, now cast as the merry skeleton marionette, is being used as a plaything to act out Jimmy's delusion. Jimmy refers back to an earlier discussion, saying that Curly taught him that sometimes they just have to take days like these. But as far as we know, Curly didn't say that. It was a vision of Curly in Jimmy's head that did. Jimmy's entire view of Curly is shaped by the idea of Curly, the captain, the man wearing the face of Pony Express, not Curly, his friend. The party ends, the game now just says take responsibility. Jimmy jumps through the bloody hatch which killed Daisuke. Above it a swan keychain hangs by its neck, either showing Jimmy's subconscious desire to kill Swansea or how Swansea could have prevented this by keeping utility locked down. In the vents, Jimmy chases a ghost of Daisuke. Jimmy hits a sign in the vents that says no turning back now. The gimmick here is that the player can only walk backwards. Eventually he walks over Daisuke's grave again, grief seeping into his thoughts. Jimmy feels so broken by Daisuke's death because he maintained power over him from start to finish. Daisuke was always subordinate, so Jimmy feels that as the captain, Daisuke was both his responsibility and somebody that legitimized him. Eventually, Jimmy hits a sign that just reads responsibility and again has to back away from it, literally backing away from his responsibility. Eventually, the ship distorts and Jimmy falls through a hole made of employee cards and hibiscus flowers. In utility, there's a vent surrounded by firemen's axes, foreshadowing an upcoming conflict with Swansea. Jimmy walks past a final selection of hibiscus flowers before finding Swansea tied up with the gun in front of him. Picking up the gun, Jimmy shoots Swansea in the head before finding himself in a graveyard. The centerpiece here is a mausoleum depicting Daisuke. Swansea chases Jimmy around with an axe. You complete the section by shooting him 3 times. Here, Jimmy and Swansea battle over the memory of Daisuke, and the game makes its alignment clear by naming the achievement for getting killed 20 times by Swansea the good ending. This segment is all proven to be a dream, and we see Swansea sat in the chair waiting for Jimmy to shoot him. Before Jimmy shoots him, Swansea gives a final monologue, and this, much like Anya and Curly's time under the stars, is highly telling in what the game wants to present to us. A swansong is a metaphor for giving a brilliant final performance right before death or retirement. The phrase comes from a legend that right before death, swans sing a beautiful or enchanting song. Swansea's swansong is neither beautiful nor enchanting, but rather blunt and to the point. Swansea drops all pretense and ideas of sensibility and tells it like it is to try and break through to Jimmy to no avail. Jimmy is playing out this dramatic confrontation in his mind. There's a good chance he doesn't hear any of this. Swansea's monologue is the angriest Mouthwashing ever gets, an unflinching critique of modern life and the systems that power it, the very same systems that allow someone like Jimmy to exist. All throughout Swansea's speech, the background distorts, playing grainy videos of nightlife, crowds of people, streetlights, alcohol, marriage, domestic life, trees and cities. It's a confusing blur, all of life condensed into a 2-minute long show reel. Swansea tells a story about how for 13 years he was an alcoholic, but after a particularly rough night he had a vision of his death in some ditch somewhere. So he goes and gets a job, gets married, has kids, all the things that he believes will bring purpose to his life. Swansea talks about how he wanted to be a good man and proved that he was never one setback away from his worst self. But ultimately, he concludes that all the goals he set for himself never felt as good as he expected when he finally got them. Now, at the end of his life, Swansea looks back on his 13 years as a drunk, bleeding out on couches, and determines that those were the best days of his life. He makes a point of telling Jimmy that no amount of titles or accolades will ever make him happy. They won't feel as good as he expects when he gets there. Swansea is disillusioned with the absurdist spectacle of modern life. Much like 20th century tragic characters like Willy Loman and Jay Gatsby, Swansea is defined by his relationship to chasing a societal ideal. However, unlike those characters, Swansea has the frame of reference to know that he was happier when he didn't partake in any of it. What the world told him was best for him only made him miserable and led to his death. The same can be said for Daisuke, Curly and Anya. The only person on board still chasing the dream is Jimmy. Swansea comments that he can see himself for what he is, but Jimmy is cowardly and selfish and he can't even see it. The one thing Swansea wishes he could have done was protect the kid, which is ambiguously either Anya's unborn child or Daisuke, far more likely the latter, but there is room for interpretation here. Jimmy tries to placate Swansea with his lies, but Swansea is having none of it and Jimmy shoots him in the head, killing off the final person who could tell anyone about his crimes. Jimmy, the representation of violent systemic oppression, has won. The scream once again flashes, "Take responsibility." Now that nobody can speak out against Jimmy, the tulpa itself watches on with judgment, Curly's singular eye emerging from every surface. Emerging from below deck, Jimmy crawls out of Curly's mouth, further cementing the symbolism of the tulpa as the mouth and the fate of the crew as the cleansing of it. Jimmy finds Curly strapped to a chair. Here is the TV playing footage from the 1950 Mighty Mouse cartoon Mother Goose's Birthday Party. This is the same TV as earlier, which calls into question my earlier assessments. Whilst yes, it can be read as Curly watching the TV and all the clips do relate to him, there is now doubt. Jimmy might have been the point of view for that section, and this recontextualizes all of the clips. Jimmy's mind being full of films like Make Mine Freedom, as well as destructive imagery like the black hole clip in the slaughterhouse, ties together all of his beliefs into a collage of violent social climbing. Whilst this scene seems to showcase Jimmy's desire, a big celebration of one person, complete with cake, it's important to know the context of the cartoon. The cake in the cartoon is a trap. Inside of it is a wolf who attacks the party. If the birthday is the celebration of the captain, the cake is just how much harm the captain is capable of doing. The wolf smuggled into the party is Jimmy. Jimmy then proceeds to feed Curly his own leg. Curly's auto-cannibalism calls to mind the story of Eri Sigfinn of Thessaly. In this story, Eri Sigfinn cut down all of the trees in a sacred grove. He was warned not to, but continued anyway, and in doing so he killed a dryad. The dryad, dying, cursed Eri Sigfinn to always be hungry, and after a hard life wrought with endless hunger, he ate himself. The parallels are clear here. Curly, like Eri Sigfinn, was driven by hubris and material gain. He willingly ignored warnings, and in doing so he was punished for it. After Curly has been fed his own leg, Jimmy enters the TV, now a sky full of stars, where he meets the burning body of Curly, presumably inflamed from the crash. Here Jimmy uses the memory of Curly to absolve himself of guilt. Curly tells Jimmy not to worry. If anyone finds them, then Curly will play the villain. Nobody will ever know what Jimmy did. Curly says he could have stopped Jimmy, but he will take responsibility for it. Jimmy says they can both be heroes and what happened was an accident. The pair are a team, and they were trapped. There was nothing else he could have done. Here Jimmy can't see a world where he takes responsibility. There's no other option in his mind, and now he's using the memory of Curly to forgive himself. Jimmy apologizes to Curly, but here we need to ask, where is Anya in all of this? Jimmy is putting himself through psychological torment here. On a subconscious level, he wants to be punished for what he's done, but in all of his visions there's no sign of Anya. Her employee cards didn't appear in the strange liminal hallways with the other four. She doesn't appear in the graveyard. She doesn't haunt him like Swansea, Daisuke and Curly. This is because Anya means absolutely nothing to Jimmy. She was only ever a way to express power, nothing more. She doesn't factor into his thoughts at all. However, her unborn child does, and they are the focus of the next and final section. Returning to the vents, Jimmy finds a, let's call it, suggestive slit of flesh in the wall. Using a scanner, he can see a horse inside of it, mirroring Anya's pregnancy. Eventually, the slit opens, blind eyes looking on, and a grotesque mockery of Pony Express's mascot Polle bursts out of it. Jimmy escapes this monster before walking through a dark void of employee cards. Again, Anya is absent. At the end of this section, he finds Polle, now atop a mountain of mouthwash. Polle speaks to him as though they were his own child, using the term old man, showing that Jimmy can only see himself, his potential child, his future, as nothing more than Pony Express property. Polle, like Curly, showers Jimmy with empty platitudes, saying that they're sorry Jimmy ended up in the situation he's in. Jimmy, however, is now in his self-loathing arc and admits that Curly was the better man. He corrects himself after saying Curly, however, saying Captain, again reducing Curly to his role within the Pony Express hierarchy. Jimmy's sole goal now is adherence to roles, and he wants above all else to try and save Curly, to preserve the hierarchy in an act of faux responsibility. Jimmy's entire reality is shaped by this, so the only way he knows to take responsibility for his actions is in serving this hierarchy. Speaking on the crash, Jimmy says that someone's worst moments don't make them a monster, but Polle, symbolic of his child and relation to Anya, asks if that's true, then why is Jimmy so concerned with Curly? Jimmy's worst moment wasn't the crash, it was what he did to Anya. Jimmy banishes the thought and returns to the birthday party scene, picking up Curly and heading to utility. Here, the barely conscious Curly is placed in the utility pod, trapped for the next 20 years as an onlooker. Jimmy shoots himself after giving a speech, concluding that he fixed everything. Ice creeps around the edges of the pod as a gunshot rings out, and the credits roll. Judgment is upon Jimmy, and it's his judgment of himself. In the end, he went out believing himself a hero, and all Curly could do was watch. Heavy stuff. So, to summarise the themes identified throughout, here's a handy list of things mouthwashing is about. Mouthwashing is about hurting/being hurt. Mouthwashing is about survival. Mouthwashing is about responsibility. Mouthwashing is about absurdism. And finally, mouthwashing is about misogyny. Even just looking at the plot beats, we understand how these themes intersect and how the game explains its takes on them to us, but through further discussing the characters, we can better understand what the team at Wrong Organ were potentially trying to say here, and what mouthwashing can teach us about these themes. So let's do just that, and talk about every single character and the relationships with these 5 central themes, starting with Jimmy.
Next time your girlfriend says, let's go movies! No!
No movies!
I'm locked in!
I'm in the trenches. I'm getting rich. Stand by me.
And enjoy the fruits of my labor.
Or be there.
Jimmy is the linchpin of this narrative. He's the POV we spend the most time as, and the narrator who shapes the story. Part of what makes Jimmy such an interesting character is how almost all of the game's themes just kind of bounce off him. Mouthwashing is about taking responsibility, he never really does that. Mouthwashing is supposed to hurt, he's pretty unfazed the entire game and ends his story believing himself to be heroic. Mouthwashing is about surviving, he messes that up too, not just for himself but for everyone else. Jimmy almost never suffers any kind of direct consequence, others suffer far more for his actions than he does. This is part of the message, Jimmy is never directly challenged, at least not by anyone with the ability to really challenge him. It's for this reason that the entire tragedy unfolds. Jimmy is presented as a highly stoppable force, but negligence allows him to flourish. The opening line, the instigating concept, "I hope this hurts," this statement doesn't apply so much to the narrative's relationship to Jimmy, but more so to how his actions are meant to reflect on a player. You are meant to feel disgusted playing as him, but also understanding. You're in his shoes for most of the game after all. Kasurin has said that players are encouraged to try and see some of themselves in Jimmy. Quote, "I can certainly get pathetically jealous. I can get insecure and self-pitying to a vicious degree. I can act aggressive and defensive in the moment, then regret it the next day. Those are the kinds of awful, clinging emotions I wanted to explore with Jimmy. I always want to be writing about uncomfortable things, about aspects of myself or others that I find distressing, shameful, or contradictory. Things that I think a lot of people can identify with, but usually aren't put into words." The game invites the player to try and empathise with a violent abuser, not because he's redeemable, but because it wants us to understand how a person can become like this. What makes someone like Jimmy do the things they do? The secondary theme, survival, galvanises him, he places himself in the role of a saviour, but his interplay with the remaining 3 themes drive him far more than this. Survival is just an excuse he gives himself to further indulge in his delusions. Responsibility, absurdism, and misogyny all work in tandem where Jimmy is concerned. The absurdism of his character is how attached he is to roles and responsibilities, even in situations when they don't matter at all. Jimmy doesn't just exist in a Debordian spectacle, he revels in it. There's no individual reality for Jimmy, only the social reality of Pony Express. He envisions his own child as the mascot of the company. When crashing the ship, he is haunted by the company's mascot, the symbol of his child who could take away his title. He defines others by titles and roles, and his core belief is that other people must prove their worth within the context of these assigned roles. His self-appointed title of captain guides him throughout the story, it informs everything that he does. Even prior to this self-appointment, however, Jimmy is shown to be someone who wants to chase power. It's explicitly the thing he likes about the job that Curly offers him. Routinely, the game tells Jimmy to take responsibility, but he can only ever internalise this as being a responsible captain, not a responsible person. What Jimmy believes is his goal towards the end of the game is the survival of the crew, but this is an entirely self-serving motivation. He doesn't want to save the crew because it's the right thing to do, he wants to do it because it will confirm to himself that he deserves his role. Jimmy speaks often about heroes and villains, and his inner dialogue with Curly, his idealised version of a perfect captain, is concerned a lot with optics, how people perceive him, rather than the actual reality of what happened on the Tolpar. Jimmy crashes the ship because his illusion of advancement without consequence is briefly shattered when Anya confronts him with proof of his wrongdoings. When speaking with Curly before crashing the ship, Jimmy talks about how this will ruin everything we've worked for, again highlighting this obsession with social advancement above actual responsibility. On the deepest level of the subconscious, Jimmy knows this is wrong. In his final act, Polle, now the manifestation of his child, wonders why he's so concerned with Curly when the thing that makes him a monster, his worst moment, is what he did to Anya. However, Jimmy banishes this thought before putting Curly in the pod and taking himself out. The closest Jimmy ever gets to actually taking any kind of responsibility is a brief dialogue within his mind, a dialogue he dismisses to chase the faux responsibility of his assigned title. Real, actual responsibility is fleeting, overshadowed by spectacle every time. Jimmy's misogyny is just an extension of his obsession with spectacle. He talks a lot about being a good man. There's a lot of dialogue about how he jealously views Curly as a better man. He motivates Daisuke to work with him with words about how popular they'll be with the ladies if they can survive. Man and woman are roles to Jimmy, like captain and nurse. They come with expected behaviours and responsibilities, and one's job is to act their role. The reason why Jimmy does what he does to Anya is pretty clear. It allows him power and lets him assert himself as being higher on the ladder than her. There's no attraction here. Jimmy doesn't even factor Anya into his thoughts, as is evidenced through his journeys through his own mind. As with all sexual assault, the point is power and reinforcing the perpetrator's self-image of being in control. Jimmy goes as far as to dehumanize Anya. He views her in his visions as a mass of flesh that births a cartoon horse. In the psych eval, he jokes about being attracted to horses, an insult directed as Anya. He can't even see her as human. To Jimmy, Anya is nothing more than a part of his role. He is a man, she is a woman, therefore his role is to subjugate her. Attraction, compatibility, or her needs don't factor into his thoughts at all. This is the natural end goal of being entirely defined by systems of spectacle, the absurd that the game looks to highlight. Anya is also trapped in this situation. Her boss brought this man into her life and she cannot practice her profession or chase her dreams anywhere else. Proximity alone to Jimmy is a danger to her. However, some fans miss this message and go as far as to claim that nothing happened to Anya. This is a gross misreading of the text, although it is in line with what the game is trying to prove. Whilst working on the video, there was a post I was sent about how Anya isn't a victim that features the following quote. Not to mention that a big part of the game is about taking responsibility, not about being a sex pest. Responsibility in the context is that Anya and Jimmy probably got a little too frisky, poor pull-out game, and of course dealing with a child not only aboard the depression ship, but the future crash is extremely hard. I've seen similar sentiments expressed elsewhere, with people claiming the game is about taking responsibility. If this is the case, then Jimmy doesn't take responsibility for Anya, ergo the game has failed in its themes, because it doesn't explore responsibility in this context. However, not having a character suffer consequence doesn't strictly mean that they shouldn't. Part of the tragedy is that Jimmy never has to take responsibility. The game tells him to, but he doesn't. This is not a narrative failing, it is the point. The message, quite evidently, is that responsibility is something that Jimmy can pick and choose when he takes. He takes it for smaller, more inconsequential things as he sees fit, and ignores the bigger issues at play. He's never introspective, he's always reactive. The game can be about something and not have every single character achieve said thing. Jimmy spends a segment of the game literally backing away from responsibility. We experience almost the entire game from his perspective, and he is shown across the title to be manipulative and a liar. The only Jimmy segments we can take as objective fact are when his mind confronts him with truths he doesn't want to admit to. The evidence is in the subtext. His treatment of the male crew and Anya is markedly different. Her interactions with him and Curly are also markedly different. To those of you who don't want to believe that this title has anything to say about misogyny, or have already left a comment and are for whatever reason still watching, I strongly encourage you to replay the game with this framing in mind and take note of just how different Jimmy's discussions with Anya and his discussions with the rest of the crew are. Just try it, see what you pick up on. There is a reason why there is only one female employee on board the Tulpa, and her role is so unique compared to the other four. Each character serves a narrative purpose, so what is Anya's in your reading? Ask yourself what Kasurinen meant when she spoke about how Curly represents downplaying and covering up for friends. How can Curly represent this if he's not downplaying or covering up for anything? Thematically, this is Jimmy's purpose. He is the villain of the piece, but the game takes place from his perspective. Through his lens, we can look to understand what exactly makes him the way that he is, and resoundingly, the reason presented is an obsession with power and reaching the top rung of an imaginary ladder. The contrasting lens, the eyes of Curly, reveals that the ladder is broken, but this is not clear to Jimmy. The inability to see this broken ladder is Jimmy's fatal flaw. He will cut the legs off his best friend so that he can overtake him. That's the point of Jimmy, that's what his story is about.
Slay! Slay!
Anya's favourite Pokemon is Glaceon, which is a pretty good pick. Personally, I prefer Umbreon, but Glaceon is probably top 3 evolutions. Here's a quote from the developer Q&A. Anya has tried and failed to get into medical school 8 times. She completed Pony Express provided nursing classes to qualify her for her position on the Tulpa, valid only on board Pony Express property and company jurisdiction because she needed money so she could keep trying. She's been reading a lot of books about psychology while on the Tulpa though. The tragedy of Anya is how inescapable her situation is. Even prior to the crash, she was going to be left unemployed, unable to practice her craft, with no savings and raising a child that she didn't want on her own, because obviously there is no way to terminate the pregnancy on board the Tulpar. There's a reason why she reveals her secret after learning that she has 8 more months on board the Tulpar. Her financial situation, employment, and even bodily autonomy are all completely beyond her control. Her role as a woman overrides her individuality. She never gets to choose anything. Thematically, survival guarantees nothing for Anya. She's already been failed and condemned by the systems that define the men in her life. Her friendship with Curly was not deemed as important enough for him to protect or look out for her. The same can be said for Swansea, although she probably didn't tell him until after the crash. Not only this, but Anya is stripped of the ability to protect herself. Pony Express's idea of safety is to lock up all the tools she could use to keep herself safe, such as the gun which she hides. Giving Anya access to the ability to defend herself would upset the hierarchy. Only the captain is allowed this right. Anya has to rely on men to protect her, but these are the same men who facilitate what happens to her. Her relationship with men across the board is this unfair dynamic. It's not only Jimmy who looks down on her. Anya is cognizant of a dead pixel that nobody else can see, a blemish on an otherwise idealistic vision. This is what makes her story hurt, how utterly doomed it is even prior to any kind of crash. She has tried and failed 8 times to earn her role, and on board the Tulpar, Jimmy berates her for this. Anya's core belief is that people's worst moments don't make them monsters. She has to believe this because her life is defined by others' worst moments, moments that they themselves won't ever take any kind of responsibility for. If she didn't believe this, she wouldn't be able to handle needing to spend every day surrounded by people who don't respect or care about her. The Tulpar is her one and only pathway to any kind of success, but its captain is putting her at risk. And you can't just leave and go somewhere else. If she wants to continue chasing her dream and working her job, then she has to deal with this miserable reality she finds herself in. Anya's pregnancy is a forced responsibility, one she doesn't want but one she has to deal with. In this sense, Anya's story is about taking responsibility for others' actions. She always bears the brunt of it, something that the men on board the Tulpar don't have to do. Curly never has to take responsibility for Jimmy, but Anya does. Likewise, Jimmy never takes responsibility for Anya. She has to deal with it all on her own. This is her role in the narrative. Let's repeat an earlier quote from the developer Q&A. Daisuke really didn't want to do the internship. His parents made him go because he'd been kind of aimless so far as a young adult. They thought it'd ultimately help him find his way in life, to have some time in a stricter environment and away from home. They were just worried for his future. When he does end up on the Tulpar, while at first anguished, he eventually decides to put on a brave face and try his best to make his parents proud. Daisuke is effectively a younger, less cynical Curly, pushed into a job he didn't want under the pretense of it giving him direction that he was otherwise lacking. His story is associated with being extremely trusting, naive, and willing to follow orders. As mentioned earlier, his signature hibiscus flower carries the connotation of trust. Daisuke has 2 paths presented to him through Swansea and Jimmy. One is to embrace reality and become conscious of the absurd, as Swansea is, and one is to buy into the spectacle like Jimmy. Through manipulation, Jimmy is able to warp the thoughts of Daisuke, and this ultimately leads to his death. Much like Curly, Daisuke could have survived at least a bit longer if he simply stood up to Jimmy, but unlike Curly, Daisuke doesn't have the life experience to know that he can even do that. Daisuke is an aimless young adult who wants to make his parents proud, so he follows their teachings, which are to respect the hierarchy, far more aligned with Jimmy. Swansea, after all, is slowly coming to the realization that discipline, responsibility, and a job got him absolutely nowhere, and he looks back fondly on being a directionless drunk. This unfortunate realization of Swansea's is incompatible with the life that Daisuke has been pushed into. If Mouthwashing is about survival, then Daisuke is robbed of his chance at it by Jimmy, ironically whilst Jimmy is trying to save everyone. If the game is meant to hurt, then Daisuke's story is meant to hurt the player with just how close he gets to making it out. Being young and not too brought into the spectacle of Pony Express, Daisuke had the chance at survival if he made it off the Tulpar. Jimmy calls attention to this when Curly breaks the news that this will be their last trip. Daisuke has the best chance of bouncing back. Daisuke has very little by way of responsibility. In part, this is because whenever he's entrusted with anything, he messes up, as we can see when he traps himself in the foam. This can be read as foreshadowing for how the task given to him by Jimmy will be fatal. However, Daisuke isn't given a lot of responsibility because Swansea just wants him to enjoy his youth. Swansea is aware that Daisuke isn't really cut out to be a mechanic, so in his own way, Swansea just tries to let Daisuke figure himself out. He sends him to do jobs in the kitchen after the crash, and prior to the crash, he tends to give him easier and more varied jobs around the ship. Swansea is at times cruel to Daisuke, but in the end it's revealed that he cared for him a lot more than he let on. Swansea is highly conscious of just how jaded and cruel a lifetime of chasing accomplishments that only left him hollow made him, so his primary goal on board the ship is protecting Daisuke from this same fate. However, Curly fails Daisuke and Swansea in the same way he failed Anya, by letting Jimmy on board. Jimmy is opposed to everything that Swansea believes, and so his intervention diverts Swansea's plan for Daisuke and leads to Daisuke dying. It's very telling that Jimmy sends Daisuke to try and save Curly, a person he was only a few months prior talking about no longer keeping alive. Between the two most likely candidates for 20 years in cryostasis, Daisuke and Curly, Daisuke is the person most likely to have some degree of a life after the crash. However, Jimmy prioritizes saving Curly because Curly is higher up the ladder. Curly's safety comes above Daisuke's in the context of Jimmy's worldview. Jimmy's corruption of Daisuke haunts Jimmy more than anything else in the game. He spends a great deal of his introspective segments grappling with the fact that he caused Daisuke's death. Unlike Anya or Swansea, who get far less space in Jimmy's thoughts, Daisuke always accepted him as captain and allowed him to indulge in his delusions. It's for this reason that Jimmy creates a mausoleum for Daisuke inside his head and is haunted by hibiscus flowers all throughout the Tolpa. Daisuke is a model employee. He plays his role perfectly, so his death is jarring to Jimmy. Daisuke fully brought into and existed within Jimmy's hierarchical worldview, and he died all the same. Jimmy cannot absolve himself by telling himself that Daisuke simply needed to listen more or give him some time the same way he does to everyone else. It's a failing he feels actual need to take responsibility for. However, once again, Jimmy doesn't actually take responsibility, he just freaks out and kills Swansea. He builds a mausoleum in his mind over actually reflecting on how his decisions led to the outcome. Daisuke is a character that serves to give us insights into how Jimmy sees the world, and also to highlight differences between Jimmy and Swansea. The tragedy of Daisuke is that in putting his trust in others, he is only let down and failed. It falls to the crew of the Tolpa to take responsibility for him. It's their job to educate him, show him the ropes, and ultimately keep him alive, but they don't do this. Daisuke's entire arc is a failure of taking responsibility.
Hey, you got that fucking science centre? What is science of fucking building ships and putting good fucking boys and fucking work? That was a science in my day. Science was fucking welding fucking ships together and sending them out to fucking sea.
Better the devil you know than the devil you don't is a common saying that applies brilliantly to Swansea's role in this game. Swansea works as a foil to Jimmy because he's implied to be just as terrible in many respects, but he knows that he is. Swansea and Jimmy largely followed the same thinking, both are loyal to Pony Express. Swansea tells us as much in his first lines of dialogue, commenting that not getting paid would be worse than dying slowly. Swansea is against entering the hold purely because he refuses to act out against the company. Like Jimmy, he's beholden to Pony Express. However, as Jimmy slips further into the spectacle, Swansea removes himself from it. Swansea rejects spectacle, but his manner of doing it isn't healthy either. The only happy life he knows is one as a directionless alcoholic, so he relapses hard when he discovers the mouthwash. It's his negligence brought about by this relapse that causes Daisuke's fate. Much like Curly, a failure to uphold responsibility of care is a defining failure of Swansea. Both Swansea and Curly are too caught up in their own problems to help the people they've been tasked with caring for. Swansea's monologue, his Swansong, is one of the most visceral parts of the entire game, and through it we gain insights into him that also drive home many of the themes the game wants to highlight. Swansea, more than anyone else, has a reason to seek out purpose through employment, discipline through labour. He chased the dream and did all the things he was supposed to do. However, now at the end of his life, looking back on it, he never felt as good as he felt he should when he hit achievements and milestones, when he played his role correctly. This isn't to say that someone can't ever find any kind of meaning through work, or that you can't be proud of achievements made or earned through your employment, but rather that Swansea never actually considered what he wanted. When Swansea's only example of an individual reality was his time spent as an alcoholic, then when confronting the absurd and looking to realise his own truths, he can only see through this lens. The only frame of reference he has for a good life is pretty unhealthy. Things we might consider to be bad are his only experience that he can refer back to, the only time he felt in control of his own life. Swansea's story is a sad one, but ultimately he is portrayed as being better off than Jimmy because he's at least confronted his own wrongs and taken some responsibility for them. Swansea has clarity in his final moments, and he tried harder than anyone else to try and get through to Jimmy. He tries to rectify all of the issues, it's just way too late at that point. The game itself clearly sides with him. Again, the game's good ending is Jimmy getting killed by Swansea. So, Swansea isn't a good person, but his clarity and the ability to be critical of others and himself is shown to elevate him above Jimmy in terms of morals. Swansea, like Daisuke, is a character that invites comparison to the point of view characters, and his purpose is to highlight the morals the game wants to impart on an audience, being critical and thinking for yourself.
When I was jorking it, I suddenly remember I lost my arm in a factory accident. That's when I asked myself the scary question, who was jorking on my peanuts?
I like Curly because he's a miserable Englishman just like me. According to developer notes, Curly was meant to have a phonetically transcribed British accent, whatever that means. In the game, there are still a few random Britishisms that exist. Kasurin says Curly represents the enabler, someone who doesn't stand up to injustice, be it through ignorant omission or willing blindness. Quote, Curly represents the kind of good-intentioned downplaying that is unfortunately common but very human, Kasurin said. In the real world, it can and does escalate to where people like him are defending perpetrators or use their power to cover up for misbehaving friends while still thinking they're doing a good, generous thing. Good intentions don't mean a whole lot after the situation has already gotten massively out of hand. This is reflected through the changes to his physical state, first losing his ability to speak out, then eventually being preserved to forever look upon the wreckage that he could have prevented. Curly bandaged up on the bed watching Jimmy's abuse of Anya is reflective of him not stepping in when he had the chance. Again, I encourage you to play the game with this framing in mind if you don't believe Jimmy did anything to Anya. When Kasurin says she wants people to play this game and feel hurt, I believe she means people like Curly. People like Jimmy, people who are completely entrenched in their worst behaviours with no interest in introspection at all, are not the kind of people to have their minds changed by playing a video game or watching a movie. If this was the case, then every kind of hatred in the world would have stopped. However, the same cannot be said for Curly. Curly is in many ways reflective of the kind of person I believe the game wants to reach. It wants to hurt you for seeing yourself in this character. It hurt me because I see myself in this character. I've made excuses for people in the past just because I felt like they were friends. I've made bad decisions out of a desire to appease everyone instead of sticking to principles. Curly is well intentioned. His fatal flaw is being too empathetic, trying too hard to see the good in everyone. Unlike Jimmy, Curly is the kind of person to indulge in introspection. If anything, he's a bit too caught up in it. Much like Anya, Curly believes that people are not defined by their worst moments. He brings Jimmy on board, sealing everyone's fate because he wants to do something good for his friend. Only retrospectively does Curly see the issue, at which point it's far too late. For Anya, this worldview is born of her needing to reconcile all the things she's gone through. For Curly, it's born of a naive optimism in the inherent good of people, another parallel between him and Daisuke. Curly's identity is breaking down at the point we get introduced to him. His mind is shattering as he tries to be both Curly the person and Curly the captain. His entrenchment in his own misery prevents him from understanding the reality around him. Where Anya is conscious of the dead pixel, Curly is more concerned with the big picture. The starry night lights up the skies of his mind. His responsibility to Pony Express and his responsibility as a friend to both Anya and Jimmy tears him apart. He says that he would do anything to protect his crew, but when his crew are in conflict, he can't do anything but stand by and watch as they tear themselves apart. Likewise, he is loyal to Pony Express, so when they discard him, he's hurt, but he has to continue wearing their face and break the news to his crew. If Mouthwashing is about responsibility, then the core of Curly's character is about just how damaging taking on too much conflicting responsibility can be. Curly cannot physically be all the things he needs to be at the same time. He can't keep everyone happy and fulfill all of his responsibilities. Much of his character is in conflict with itself. We see this reflected when looking upon his mindscape, a collage of pro-corporate propaganda films, existentialist musings on the insignificance of mankind, and visuals of just how broken and cruel everything is. Curly says himself that he wants to escape his own head. There's just too much in there. Curly could have saved everyone, but in the end only he survived, trapped as an onlooker for at least another 20 years. He should have looked to prioritise what actually mattered to him, instead of trying to play every single role assigned to him at the same time. The contradictions of his existence drove him to the brink of madness, standing on the edge of a cliff with his feet in cement. We learn from his dialogue in The Last One and Then Another that he has only devolved further into despair, lamenting his mistakes and cracking macabre jokes about corporate culture. Unfortunately, much like Freddy in Going Places, Curly is never allowed to explore what he actually wants, who he wants to be. His individual reality is completely and utterly eclipsed by the social reality of his job. Curly's entire life is such a balancing act that attempting to do anything at all would send it all crumbling down, plunging him into the depths of uncertainty. This is only exacerbated by the fact that Curly is piloting a skeleton crew with 8 months of voyage left. There's an argument to be made that if he had stepped in and done what he should have done, he'd be down a co-pilot or a nurse, both essential roles. Curly, like all the characters in this story, are just as much victims of happenstance as they are individual failings. Some, like Jimmy, are definitely more culpable, but Mouthwashing clearly invites you to understand how much responsibility is a choice and how much it is an unfair burden. However, even with the most sympathetic possible view, Curly is still a highly flawed character. His choices are what causes everything to happen. Yes, his hand is guided by responsibilities and roles, he is a victim to the spectacle as much as anyone else, but it is his actions that condemn his crew, a subversion of his role as a protector of them. Curly is hurt by his situation, but in the end it's his individual choices that seal his fate. Much like a tragic protagonist from 20th century plays, Curly is beset by failure on the personal and societal scale. His tragedy is myriad in this sense, existent on all layers of interpretation. That's what his story is about. Ultimately, if you want my opinion, which at this point I'm assuming you do, the varied themes of Mouthwashing point to a singular main takeaway: the importance of being critical and exercising your ability to speak out. You can prevent the weeds of hatred from blooming by being a reasonable voice to your friends and loved ones. Mouthwashing is critical of a lot of things: misogyny, corporate culture, senseless violence, and the pursuit of power for power's sake. However, universally, the solution offered is simply to stand up to it and question it. Jimmy, the villain, is extremely stoppable and insecure. It's only through the negligence of others that he blossoms into the threat that he is. The fact is that people's worst moments can make them monsters, but these moments don't happen in a vacuum. They are brought about by external factors as well as individual beliefs, all of which can, to a degree, be mitigated. Curly needed to be more critical of Jimmy. He needed to be more critical of Pony Express and the conditions of his ship. He should have stood up for Anya and the rest of his crew. They were his responsibility, but in the end he was little more than an onlooker with a fancy title. The narrative makes this abundantly clear. It's not wrong or evil to point out injustice. It's good, but it's also hard. Not being beholden to spectacle, not falling into despair when confronted with the absurd or conflicting responsibilities, it's all very difficult, but a necessary part of becoming the best, most empathetic version of yourself. Good intentions mean absolutely nothing. Actions are what matter. A sympathetic onlooker is still just an onlooker. The blame is not solely on Curly. Swansea and Daisuke also had chances to refuse Jimmy, but they never did. All of them suffered for this. This is a lesson not only relevant to individuals within the gaming industry, who were the audience this game was specifically meant to hurt, it's a broadly applicable message with increasing relevance. On top of that, a second central takeaway is that it's okay to feel aimless. Daisuke and Curly drive themselves to their fates out of a desire to fit roles or have direction. Swansea decides only in his final moments how futile it all was. Don't spend your life chasing direction through a company. Step back and analyse your individual desires. At the end of the day, it's okay if a job is just a job. It's okay if you would rather be fishing. It's not your individual responsibility to worry about what Pony Express wants. Direction and purpose can come at any time and from any avenue. There's no set path that applies to every single person, and anyone who tells you that there is probably trying to scam you or get you to join some kind of cult. Purpose is found through a sometimes lifelong process of trial and error, navigating through ever-changing conditions and factoring in your interests, goals, responsibilities, and situation. It isn't a set end point, it should change over time. It's okay to be ambitious, but understand that what you want today might not matter at all tomorrow. To summarise, when analysing the game with a critical lens, it's clearly trying to impart these lessons onto its audience. It's a tragedy, yes, but made all the more tragic by how avoidable it all was. If the cast weren't also caught up in their roles and their preconceptions, then they could have all lived. In fact, they could have been a lot better off in general. Now, because of Pony Express being awful, that quality of life is debatable. They would have lost their jobs anyway, but it's a chance at life nonetheless. Yes, playing it is supposed to hurt, but it's cathartic pain. If you see some of yourself in Curly, or even Jimmy, then that's fine, it's human to feel those things, but it's also up to you to not become defined by your worst moments. It's your responsibility to not only have good intentions, but to make good choices and to help others make good ones too. Tragedies will happen, but it is only in refusing to acknowledge them that they can get worse. This game's antagonist and core crises are horrifyingly preventable. That's the point. For all its talk about taking responsibility, above all else, Mouthwashing is about those situations where responsibility is completely sidelined or obscured by the faux responsibility of a warped reality. Do not neglect kindness in favour of climbing a ladder. You might find that it's broken as you get to the top. Thanks for watching. If you made it this far, subscribe, be kind, I'll see you next time, blah blah blah, bye.